After posting a video response against the blasphemy challenge, I was asked by a number of people to explain the line of argumentation that I used. The kind of argument used in that video is called a transcendental argument, and I used it to demonstrate the existence of God. A transcendental argument takes something in the world or in our experience and tries to show what must be true in order for that thing to have meaning, be intelligible, and even to exist at all. In other words, it asks what the necessary preconditions are for that thing to be what it is. When this is done, the answer that is given is more than the best explanation, it is the only explanation. This is because the necessary preconditions could not be anything else. This is a different kind of argument from the traditional theistic argument. Traditional arguments for the existence of God, such as the cosmological and design arguments, take some fact or experience and then reason to what they consider to be the best and most probable explanation for it. Ideally, the unbeliever does the same thing but arrives, of course, at a different conclusion. Now imagine you live in a snow globe, and one day it occurs to you that certain things in the globe seem to have design features. So you do some investigating around the snow globe and find many things you think indicate the world in which you live in was designed. You continue to collect these things and make a big stack until finally your stack presses up against the glass and can go no higher. From there, you look through the glass at what is outside, and from your vantage point, you're convinced that there is someone outside the glass who made the snow globe. However, another person in the snow globe has also been looking for design features, but he keeps finding things that he thinks show the opposite. He too stacks his evidence up until it reaches the glass, and he too looks outside, but unlike you, he sees nothing. In both instances, the same tools of investigation are used: the laws of logic, the laws of nature, induction based on the uniformity of the universe, morality, and the mind. The transcendental argument does not deny the soundness and effectiveness of these tools, but these tools cannot be legitimately used unless they can be first accounted for. They cannot be assumed. Where did they come from and why do they work? To use these tools and not answer those questions is sort of like stealing a car. It functions perfectly well as a car, but its use is illegitimate. Now, when I saw the blasphemy challenge, what was interesting to me was not the challenge itself, which was silly and misguided at best and really just a publicity stunt. What interested me was that the sponsor of the challenge called itself the Rational Response Squad. I am all for rationality, but as an overtly atheist organization, it is clear they cannot explain where rationality comes from or why it works. In other words, they're driving a stolen car. So, as an illustration of how the transcendental argument works, I'll consider rationality itself. To be rational is to be in accord with the laws of logic. But what is the nature of the laws of logic, and where did they come from? Now, because I'm arguing for the existence of the Christian God, my understanding is that God is the ultimate and absolute source of all things. Not just physical things, all things. This has very important implications for the non-physical entities such as laws of logic, laws of morality, laws of nature, etc. If the God of the Bible does exist, then how are we to assess truth claims about him and investigate him? Only by using tools that are grounded in him in the first place. In other words, if the God of the Bible exists, then logic is not something that exists independently, and therefore there is no neutral ground to argue from. Every argument either presupposes God exists or that God does not exist. The best way to see if this way of arguing works out is to conduct a thought experiment. Try to account for the laws of logic by presupposing God does not exist. If God did not exist, then how can we explain laws of logic? They could not have come into existence because that would mean there was a period when what they affirm was not the case, and it is impossible to conceive of a coherent system of thought in which these laws were something other than what they are. For example, if the laws of logic were other than what they are, then something that could claim to be itself and not itself at the same time and in the same way, which is absurd. For the same reason, the laws of logic cannot be a human convention, since that would indicate that they are arbitrary and could be something other than what they are. And as such, the laws of logic would not govern thinking. They would be governed by thinking. Also, if the laws of logic are human creation, how could we know they actually corresponded to reality, that they had any relation to the real world? And neither could the laws of logic be something eternally existing, some impersonal abstract law like a Platonic form, since the laws of logic govern thought, and thought is the exclusive ability of persons. Thus, the source of logic must be personal. To appeal to an abstract entity utterly fails to account for the existence of the laws of logic. So laws of logic have no beginning, cannot be something other than what they are, and they oblige every person as they engage in thinking. Given this, what must be true in order for the laws of logic to exist as they do? The source of logic must be transcendent from the world, non-contingent, unchanging, lest laws change, which we have mentioned is absurd and impossible. It must be perfect, since the laws cannot be improved, and personal. Thus, the necessary precondition for the laws of logic is God, a transcendent, non-contingent, immutable, perfect, personal being. And so we see that existence of God is demonstrated by the impossibility of the contrary. Now, some have objected to this kind of reasoning as being circular, that it begs the question by assuming its conclusion and its premise. The interesting thing about this charge is that all arguments are circular. They all ultimately appeal to some self-attesting authority that is assumed as the starting point that justifies other beliefs. In many systems, this self-attesting authority is reason or logic, but justification cannot be given for using reason without first presupposing it to be true. After all, if one tries to justify reason without using reason, they're not going to get very far. Thus, they use reason to justify reason, and this is called a vicious circle, a circular argument that is fallacious. Transcendental arguments are circular only in a certain sense, but they are better described as a spiral. Spiral reasoning is so called because the conclusion and the premises, though they are entailed in each other, are on different planes. One transcends the other. Only if transcendence is impossible can the argument be justifiably considered a vicious circle. The rational response squad presupposes that God does not exist and therefore rejects transcendence. Thus they are trapped in a fallacious argument, a vicious circle, and that makes them by definition the irrational response squad. One last thing, and that's why this argument is for the Christian God and no other. In our quest for knowledge, we seek meaning and unity based on individual instances and experiences. We encounter things and try to discern a relationship between them, a universal whole that makes sense of the particular. This has been called the problem of the one and the many. Now, if the world is derivative of God and reflects his character and nature to any degree, then God must somehow be the resolution of the one and the many, the absolute one and many. Only the Christian God can provide this concept of a personal absolute one and many, and it's called the Trinity. In conclusion, the Transcendental argument shows us that every argument, no matter what is trying to be shown, must use tools that can only be accounted for by the existence of God. Even arguments against God must first presuppose him to be true in order to get off the ground. As one theologian put it, atheism presupposes theism, and the best proof for the existence of God is that without him you can't prove anything at all.